The stagecoach wheels ground to a final, jarring halt, throwing up a cloud of grit that tasted of alkali and defeat. Clara's teeth ached from the clenching. For 6 days she had been rattled like a dried bean in a pod, and now stillness felt wrong. The door was flung open by a man who did not offer a hand, only a grunt. She descended into the street, her black boots landing in ankle-deep dust the color of rust. The town was a gash in the earth, a single rutted road lined with raw lumber storefronts and canvas tents. It smelled of sulfur, unwashed men, and fried pork. This, then, was her new life. Clara clutched the small reticule in her lap, her knuckles white. Inside it, next to a single silver dollar, was a folded piece of paper. It was not a love letter, but a receipt, a bill of sale for a wife, negotiated by telegraph and her father's shame. Behind her, the driver heaved her trunk onto the boardwalk with a crack. The wood was split, the leather straps brittle. It held everything she owned, 2 gray dresses, her mother's Bible, and a tin of sewing needles. The town stopped to watch. From the shaded porch of the saloon, men in muddy trousers and sweat-stained hats paused their talk. Their eyes were not kind. They did not see a woman, they saw meat or a problem. Near the mercantile, 2 women in sun-faded calico stopped and whispered, their faces pinching with the particular cruelty of the pious. Clara heard the words carried on the hot, dry wind. "That's her, the preacher's girl, from back east. Ruined, they say. Come to sell herself to Rig. Lord have mercy." Clara's spine stiffened. She kept her chin high, a useless habit taught by a father who had cast her out the moment her presence threatened his pulpit. She would not give them the satisfaction of her tears. She would not let them see her break. She was already broken. She scanned the faces, looking for the man who had paid her passage, the man whose name was at the bottom of the folded paper. Then she saw him. He was not with the others. He stood apart, near a sway-backed mule hitched to a small wagon. He was a tall man, built of angles and silence. His clothes were weather-worn. The denim faded to the color of the sky, the leather of his gun belt oiled dark with use. He wore his hat low, casting his face in shadow, but she could feel the weight of his stare. This was Samuel Rigg. He did not move toward her. He did not greet her. He simply waited, a still point in the town's hostile curiosity. Clara took a breath, the dust burning her lungs, and walked toward him, her trunk left abandoned on the boardwalk. The crowd's whispers died. The men in the saloon turned away, suddenly finding their card games more interesting. The women scurried into the mercantile. Samuel Rigg's reputation was a physical thing, a cold shadow that fell over the entire street. It was, she realized, a reputation soaked in blood. She stopped a few feet from him. She could see his face now, what the shadow had hidden. His skin was burned brown by the sun, creased around the eyes. A scar, white and jagged, cut from his left temple to his jaw. His eyes were a flat, hard gray, like river stones. "Mr. Rigg?" Her voice was a dry croak. He gave a single short nod. He turned, walked to her trunk, and lifted the cracked thing as if it weighed nothing. He swung it into the back of the wagon, the motion economical and strong. He did not offer her a hand up to the seat. He only gestured with his chin toward the wagon, then moved to untie the mule. Clara gathered her skirts, thick with trail dust, and hauled herself up onto the hard wooden bench. He climbed up beside her. The space was small. She could feel the heat radiating from his body. Though he seemed cold as iron, he snapped the reins, and the mule lurched forward, pulling them out of the town and into the unforgiving wilderness that surrounded it. The ride was worse than the stagecoach. There was no pretense of a road, only a harsh desert trail that wound through canyons of red rock and plains of thorny scrub. The sun was a physical weight, a hammer blow on her head. Her bonnet offered no protection. Samuel Rigg did not speak. The only sounds were the creak of the wagon wheels, the mule's plodding hooves, and the high, thin shriek of a hawk circling overhead. Clara stared at the land passing by. This was Red Hollow. It was not a valley of comfort, but a barren, scorched place. The ground was littered with the stumps of burned trees, black skeletons reaching for a merciless sky. Broken fences, relics of some failed hope, lay half buried in the dust. She heard the yip and cry of coyotes, though it was still full daylight. They were hungry. She had traded one hell for another. She closed her eyes, her shame a bile rising in her throat. She thought of her father, standing on his porch, his face rigid with righteousness, telling her she was dead to him. She thought of the man who had put her in this position, a man of wealth and standing, who had smiled as he promised her ruin. She opened her eyes. The man beside her had not moved. He drove the mule with a steady, indifferent hand, his gaze fixed on the trail ahead, as if he were entirely alone. It was near dusk when they arrived. The cabin was not a home. It was a box, built of rough-hewn logs, chinked with mud, and set against the base of a rocky butte. It was the most isolated place she had ever seen. There were no other lights, no other plumes of smoke. Just the cabin, a small, sagging barn, and the immense, empty silence of the desert. He pulled the wagon to a stop, wrapped the reins, and jumped down. He unloaded her trunk and carried it to the porch, dropping it by the door. He did not unlock the door. It was not locked. He pushed it open and stepped aside. A clear, silent order for her to enter. Clara slid down from the wagon, her legs trembling from exhaustion. She stepped past him, into the gloom. The cabin was one room. It was starkly clean, but empty of comfort. There was a stone hearth, a rough-hewn table with 2 stools, and a narrow bed in the far corner. A few iron pots hung near the fire. Samuel Rigg entered behind her, his presence seeming to suck the last of the light from the room. He pointed to a steep ladder built against the far wall. "The attic," he said. His voice was like stones grinding together, rough from disuse. "That is your room." He moved to the table, struck a match, and lit a small kerosene lamp. The light flickered, casting huge, dancing shadows. Clara looked at the ladder. She looked at the narrow bed in the corner. Clearly his. She looked back at him. This was the arrangement. Then, she was not a wife. She was cargo. "My trunk," she whispered. He went back outside and brought it in, setting it at the base of the ladder. He turned to a small cupboard, took out a loaf of dark bread and a tin canteen, and set them on the table. "This is yours." He offered no wedding ring. There had been no stop at a church, no word from a preacher. He offered only silence, bread, and a room of her own. It was more, she supposed, than she deserved. She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She picked up the bread and the water, and, bracing herself, climbed the ladder. The attic was low-ceilinged, the rough roof planks just inches above her head. The wind whistled through gaps in the shingles. A simple cot with a thin, scratchy blanket lay on the floor. There was one small window, a hole cut in the wood, with no glass. She sat on the cot, the bread in her lap. She was too tired to eat, too frightened to sleep. The cold was already seeping up through the floorboards. Down below, she heard him stoke the fire. She heard the scrape of a stool, and then only silence. She lay down, pulling the thin blanket over her, still in her dusty traveling clothes. Sleep would not come. The cold was sharp, but it was the sounds from below that kept her awake. Long after the fire had burned down to embers, she heard him rise. She heard the floorboards groan under his weight. He was pacing. Back and forth, a heavy, restless tread, like a caged animal. Once, he stopped, and she heard a sharp, choked intake of breath, a sound of raw pain, quickly stifled. He was a man haunted by nightmares, but he was not sleeping. He was pacing his ghosts into the ground. Clara pulled the blanket over her head, her own fear a cold knot in her stomach. She was trapped in a house with a man whose reputation frightened a town of rough miners, a man who could not find peace even in his own home. The first days passed in a haze of silence. Samuel Rigg rose before the sun, and she would hear him outside, chopping wood or tending to the mule. He left for long stretches, riding into the hills with his rifle, and returned well after dark. He never spoke to her. He would leave bread on the table, or sometimes a portion of stew in a pot by the cold hearth, and she would eat it alone, in the attic, while he sat below, cleaning his weapons. She felt herself shrinking. The silence was an ocean, and she was drowning in it. On the third day, she found a stub of a pencil and a few scraps of brown paper in a discarded crate. Her hands trembled as she began to write, the words pouring out of her in a desperate, jagged script. She wrote to her sister, Mary, "My dearest sister, I have arrived. The journey is over. I am in a place called Red Hollow. It is not green. There is nothing here but rock and sun. The man, Mr. Rigg, he is a silent man. He does not speak. He has given me a room in the attic. It is very cold." She paused, biting her lip. She could not tell Mary the truth. She could not write that she had been purchased. "The people are rough, but I am safe. The air is clean." She stopped. It was a lie. The air was full of dust and fear. She crumpled the paper, her fist tight. She began again, on a new sheet. The truth this time, a truth no one would ever see. "Mary, I am terrified. I have not been a wife. I have not been anything. I am a piece of furniture he has acquired. I sleep in an attic and listen to him pace all night. I hear him in his sleep. He calls out names. I do not know if I have become less than human. I do not know what I am. I am a ghost in a house of ghosts." She wept then, dry, silent sobs that shook her body. She hid the letters under the thin mattress of her cot, a testament to a life she was no longer living. A week after her arrival, they needed supplies. He hitched the mule to the wagon and simply looked at her. She understood. She was to come with him. The town was just as she remembered, the same stairs, the same whispers. But this time, she was not just the ruined preacher's daughter. She was Samuel Rigg's woman. The brand was invisible, but she felt it scorching her skin. They entered the mercantile. The proprietor, a balding man named Mr. Harris, was weighing beans for another customer. When he saw Samuel, his hands froze. The other customer, a woman in a gingham bonnet, gathered her skirts and hurried out, casting a fearful, pitying glance at Clara. Samuel walked to the counter and placed a small list on the wood. Flour, salt, coffee, kerosene. Mr. Harris looked at the list, but not at Samuel. He hurried to fill the order, his movements jerky and fast. He piled the goods on the counter. "That will be $2.40, he mumbled to the floor. Samuel placed $3 silver on the counter. Mr. Harris swept them up and counted out the change, placing the coins on the wood, not into Samuel's outstretched hand. He would not touch him. While Samuel loaded the supplies into the wagon, Clara lingered near the fabric bolts, desperate for a moment of normalcy. She heard the whispers from the back of the store. "Where Mr. Harris was speaking in a low, urgent tone to his wife. "I shot him right there, in the church pew. Sunday service. Didn't even blink. Right through the eye. Said the man deserved it. The man's wife said he deserved it. Still, in a church." Clara felt a chill go through her that had nothing to do with the morning air. She looked out the window. Samuel was standing by the wagon, his back to her, staring out at the desert. A man who shot another in a church. This was her husband. This was her protector. She hurried out of the store, her head down, the rumors following them both like shadows. Life at the cabin settled into a hard, brittle routine. Clara did what she could. She swept the floor, scrubbed the iron pots, and mended his clothes. though he never asked her to. She found a small, neglected chicken coop behind the barn with 3 stringy hens and began to tend to them, grateful for the small, stupid lives that depended on her. She and Samuel moved around each other, 2 planets in a cold, silent orbit. They ate at the same table, but never at the same time. She would eat her bread and beans in the morning light, and he would eat his stew in the dark, long after she had retreated to the attic. The porch had a loose rail on the side nearest the cabin wall, right where she had to step to go about her chores. The wood was rotten, and it wobbled dangerously under her hand. She had learned to avoid it, to brace herself on the main post instead. One night, a sound woke her from a shallow, uneasy sleep. It was not the pacing. It was a different sound, a careful, muffled thud, then the quiet rasp of a saw. She crept from her cot to the small, glassless window. By the light of a pale, 3/4 moon, she saw him. Samuel was on the porch, his back to her. He had a hammer and a piece of new wood. He was on his knees, bracing the post with his shoulder, carefully, quietly, fixing the broken rail. He was not doing it for himself. He never used that side of the porch. He was doing it for her. He worked for nearly an hour, his movements precise, making as little noise as possible. He was fixing it secretly, as if the act of care was a weakness, a thing to be ashamed of. When he was finished, he tested the rail, putting his full weight on it. It held firm. He gathered his tools and disappeared into the barn. Clara returned to her cot, but she did not sleep. A strange, tight feeling had lodged itself in her chest. It was not kindness, not as she had ever known it. It was something harder, something more practical. It was the first time he had acknowledged her existence as anything more than an obligation. The next evening, she found the courage. He was sitting on the porch step, cleaning his rifle, the setting sun painting the rocks a deep, bloody red. She had been sweeping the porch, her hands raw from the lye soap. She stopped, her broom still. The words came out before she could stop them. Quiet, almost stolen by the wind. "Why did you send for me?" He did not stop his work. His hands, large and scarred, moved over the metal with practiced ease, rubbing the oil into the barrel. She waited. The silence stretched, filled only by the click of the cleaning rod and the first call of a night bird. She thought he would not answer. She felt foolish, small. He stopped. He looked up, not at her, but at the dark line of the horizon. His face was unreadable in the twilight. "The agent had a list of women," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Some from families with good names. Some young, some pretty." Clara's heart sank. She was none of those things. He set the rifle piece down. "Your papers said you was a preacher's daughter. Said you was disgraced, cast out." He turned his head then, and his gray eyes met hers in the dusk. They held no pity, only a flat, stark assessment. "You looked like you'd already survived worse." Clara felt the air leave her lungs. It was not a compliment. It was not an insult. It was a statement of fact. He had not chosen her for her virtue, or her beauty, or her dowry. He had chosen her for her scars. He had chosen her because he assumed she was too broken to break any further. It was the most honest and the most brutal thing anyone had said to her in a year. She did not know whether to weep or be grateful. She just gave a small nod, turned, and continued sweeping the porch. That night, the weather changed. The day had been still and hot, the air heavy, oppressive. As darkness fell, a wind picked up, howling down from the mountains. It did not sound like wind. It sounded like a woman screaming. Clara lay in the attic, listening as the first drops of rain, hard as pebbles, struck the roof. The wind ripped at the cabin, shaking the very logs. A brilliant flash of white lit the attic, followed an instant later by a crack of thunder so loud it vibrated in her bones. The storm had broken directly over them. Rain began to pour through the gaps in the roof. cold and steady. Her thin blanket was soaked in seconds. The wind howled through her small window, tearing at her. She heard a heavy boot on the ladder. She sat up, clutching the wet blanket to her chest. Samuel's head and shoulders appeared. "Get down!" he yelled over the roar of the storm. "The attic ain't safe." She scrambled down the ladder, shaking. The main room was chaos. The door was rattling in its frame, and wind and rain blasted through the cracks in the chinking. The fire in the hearth spat and hissed as water dripped down the chimney. Clara stood in the middle of the room, her thin dress plastered to her body, her teeth chattering. She was trembling so hard she could barely stand. Samuel was by the window, staring out into the black, rain-lashed night, as if watching for an enemy. He seemed carved from the same stone as the mountains, unmoved by the elemental fury. He must have heard the rattle of her teeth. He turned, his gaze falling on her. She was a drowned rat, a pathetic, shivering thing. He moved toward her. Clara flinched, backing away. He stopped. He looked at her, then at his own heavy canvas coat, which hung on a peg by the door. He walked over, pulled it from the peg, and came back to her. He did not try to wrap it around her. He did not touch her. He simply held it out. Clara stared at it, confused. "Take it," he said, his voice rough. Her fingers, numb and clumsy, reached out and took the coat. It was heavy, and still held the faint warmth of his body. It smelled of dust, gun oil, and him. She pulled it around her shoulders. The trembling did not stop. It was not just the cold, it was the fear, the violence of the storm, the proximity of this man, and this small, impersonal kindness. He watched her for a moment longer, his face a mask in the flickering lamplight. Then he turned away from her and went back to the window, resuming his watch. They sheltered together in the small, roaring room, he standing by the window, a silent guard against the night, she huddled in his coat by the dying fire, unable to stop shaking. The storm passed, leaving the air washed clean and sharp with the smell of wet sage. But the silence that returned to the cabin was heavier than before. It was no longer just an absence of sound. It was a physical presence. A third person in the small room, filled with all the things they did not say. Clara tried to fill it. She threw herself into the mechanics of living, adopting a routine as if it were armor. She rose before dawn, her feet silent on the ladder rungs. She would sweep the cabin floor, the rough broom whispering over the planks. She fed the 3 stringy hens, scattering the grain she had insisted Samuel buy. The birds were skittish, but they were alive, and their simple, clucking demands were a comfort. She mended. She took Samuel's work shirts, stiff with sweat and dust, and patched the elbows. She sewed the button back on his coat, the one that had been missing since her arrival. She worked until her hands were raw and her back ached, fighting to make the empty box a home. But the silence ate at her. It was in the way Samuel would enter the cabin and not look at her, in the way he ate his food standing by the hearth, as if he were a visitor. It was in the long, long hours of the afternoon when he was gone, and the only sound was the buzz of a fly against the windowless opening of her attic room. She was a wife who was not a wife, in a home that was not a home. After a few weeks, the hens began to lay. It was a small, fierce triumph. 3, sometimes 4, pale brown eggs a week. It was not enough to live on, but it was hers. It was something she had cultivated from the dust. She saved them in a small basket. When she had a dozen, she knew she had to go to town. She needed thread, and she longed for a small bag of sugar, a simple sweetness in a life gone sour. She waited for Samuel to be gone, tending to a broken fence line at the edge of his property. She did not ask his permission. She did not take the mule. She wrapped the eggs carefully in rags, put them in her basket, and began the 5-mile walk to town under the oppressive morning sun. By the time she reached the main street, her dress was dark with perspiration, and her face was coated in fine red dust. She pushed open the door to the mercantile, the small bell tinkling. Mr. Harris was at the counter, the same as before, but this time, 2 of the town women were there, the same 2 who had whispered on her arrival. They were inspecting a bolt of gingham fabric. Their names, she had heard, were Mrs. Pruitt and Mrs. Gable. They turned as one when she entered, their eyes traveling over her, noting the dust, the cheapness of her dress, the absence of a ring on her finger. Clara kept her gaze steady and walked to the counter. Mr. Harris, she said, her voice quiet but firm. I have eggs to trade. She set the basket on the counter and unwrapped the eggs. They were small, but perfect. Mr. Harris eyed them. Rig don't keep chickens. I keep them, Clara said. Mrs. Pruitt let out a small, sharp laugh, like a pebble dropping on tin. Well, listen to that. She keeps chickens. I heard, Mrs. Gable stage whispered, loud enough for the entire store to hear, that he paid her passage in full, bought her straight from her father, after, well, she's bartered her soul for a patch of barren land. Mrs. Pruitt said, turning her back to Clara, but pitching her voice to Carrie, living in sin with that killer, a preacher's daughter, it's a disgrace to God. Clara's hands clenched at her sides. The blood drained from her face, then rushed back in a hot, painful tide. She wanted to run, to drop the basket and flee back to the silence of the cabin. But she thought of the thread. She thought of the sugar. She thought of the long walk. I need dark thread, Clara said to Mr. Harris, her voice trembling only slightly. And a pound of sugar. Is this enough? Mr. Harris, avoiding the women's eyes and her own, nodded curtly. He took the eggs and pushed the thread and a small bag of sugar across the counter. Clara put them in her empty basket and walked out. She did not run. She walked with her head high, the whispers following her like stinging insects. Soul for land. She heard again. She did not cry. Not until she was a mile out of town, hidden by a bend in the canyon, did she allow the tears to fall, hot and angry on the dusty trail. She did not tell Samuel what had happened. She simply put the thread in her sewing tin and hid the sugar in the back of the cupboard, a secret indulgence. Her trips to town became a necessary agony. She went only when she must, and always on foot. On one such trip, she was standing at the counter of the mercantile, waiting for Mr. Harris to weigh out a sack of beans. The saloon across the street was loud, the midday drinking already begun. The swinging doors opened, and a man stumbled out. He was large, with a florid face and a thick, wet mustache. He saw her through the mercantile window. He crossed the street, his steps unsteady, and pushed into the store. He smelled of sour whiskey and unwashed wool. Well now, he slurred, leaning heavily on the counter, much too close to her. If it ain't Rig's little shadow. Clara turned her body away, her stomach twisting. Heard you was a holy woman, the man said, a grin splitting his face, showing brown teeth. Come to save us all? He leaned in closer. Or just him? Please, Clara whispered, looking at Mr. Harris, who was suddenly very busy under the counter. I got something better than beans for you. The man reached into his coat and pulled out a flat flask of whiskey. Have a taste. Loosen you up. No, thank you, Clara said, trying to step around him. He blocked her path, his smile gone. Too good for it. Too good for me. He reached out and grabbed her arm. His grip was hard, his fingers biting into her flesh. Maybe you need something darker, something to remind you what you are. Clara froze. The smell of him, the feel of his hand. It brought back the other man, the other room, the smell of brandy and cigar smoke. Her breath caught. The mercantile bell did not tinkle. The door just opened. The man's grip on her arm did not slacken. He was too drunk to notice. But the air in the store changed. It grew cold. Samuel Riggs stood in the doorway. He had not come in the wagon. He must have followed her. He was just standing there, his hands loose at his sides, his gray eyes flat and dead. He did not look at Clara. He looked only at the hand on her arm. The drunken man, feeling the sudden silence, turned. His face went pale. He tried to laugh it off. Just offering the lady a drink. Rig, no harm. Samuel did not speak. He did not move. He just watched. His silence was louder than a gunshot. It was absolute, a promise of utter violence. The man's hand on Clara's arm began to tremble, slowly, as if pulling it from a trap. He let go of her. No harm, he repeated, his voice a squeak. He began to back away, holding his hands up. Just leavin'. Samuel stepped to the side, a gesture of pure, cold contempt, allowing the man to pass. The man scrambled out the door, tripping on the boardwalk in his haste to get away. Clara was shaking, her arm throbbing where he had held it. Samuel turned his gaze to Mr. Harris, who was still hiding behind the counter. Mr. Harris shot up, his face slick with sweat. Her beans! Mr. Rigg! Right here! He shoved the sack toward Clara. Samuel looked at Clara. Go, he said, just the one word. She grabbed the sack and fled the store, her heart pounding a sick rhythm against her ribs. He did not follow her immediately. She was halfway down the street when he exited the mercantile. The mule and wagon hitched outside. He must have brought it and been waiting. He did not speak to her on the ride home. He did not ask if she was hurt, but when he stopped the wagon at the cabin, he got down, and for the first time, he held up his hand to help her down. She stared at it. His hand was large, the knuckles scarred and hard as bark. She ignored it, sliding down on her own, and hurried inside. That night, she heard him pacing again, a long, restless patrol from the door to the hearth. It was a few nights later, while she was mending a tear in the thin attic blanket, that she saw it. Samuel was out, checking a trap line. The cabin was cold. The fire in the hearth had burned down to white ash. A draft was coming from a loose stone at the base of the hearth, on the right side. She knelt, thinking to push it back in. It moved easily, too easily. Behind it was a dark, narrow hollow. Curious. She reached inside. Her fingers brushed against oilcloth. She pulled it out. It was a long, heavy bundle. Her hands trembled as she unwrapped it. It was not a gun, it was a blade, a long, heavy knife, almost a short sword. The blade was dark, wicked-looking, and hung to a razor's edge. The hilt was wrapped in worn black leather. It was not a tool for skinning rabbits or cutting wood. It was a weapon made for one purpose. She stared at it, a cold dread filling her. This was what the town whispered about. This was the tool of the man who shot another in a church. She heard the mule outside. Frantically, she rewrapped the blade in its oilcloth, shoved it back into the hollow, and pushed the stone into place. She was halfway up the ladder when he walked in. He stopped and looked at her. His eyes narrowed, sensing the change in the room. He glanced at the hearth, then back at her. Clara scrambled into the attic and pulled the blanket over her head, her heart hammering. The blade under the hearth, a reputation soaked in blood. She had to know. She could not live in this silence with that thing beneath her feet. The next day, she found him by the barn, replacing a worn strap on the mule's harness. "Where did you come from, Samuel?" she asked, her voice tight. He did not look up, his hands continuing their work with the leather. "Don't matter." "It matters to me," she said, louder now. "The town, they say things. They say you are a killer." He pulled the strap tight with a sharp grunt. "They talk. That's all they're good for." "They said you shot a man in a church, through the eye." He went still. His hand stopped moving. He slowly, deliberately, put the harness down. He turned to face her. His gray eyes were not angry. They were cold and tired. "You need to stop," he said, his voice low. "I need to know," she pleaded. "I live in your house. I am your wife." The word hung in the air, foreign and false. He took a step toward her, and she flinched. He stopped, his face tightening. "You don't open graves," he warned her, his voice a rasp. "That you're not ready to fall into, let it be, woman." He turned his back on her, picked up the harness, and walked into the barn, leaving her alone with his warning and the dust. A few days later, she was cleaning out her cracked trunk, sorting the few possessions she had. At the very bottom was the dress. It was a dark, heavy wool, the color of slate. Her preacher's dress, the dress she had worn every Sunday, the dress she was wearing the day her father called her a harlot and told her to leave his sight. It was a garment of shame, of piety, of a life that had tried to strangle her. She took it out. She looked at it, the high, choking collar, the rigid seams. It was a lie. She carried it out behind the barn, to the place where Samuel burned his trash in a rusted metal drum. She stuffed the dress inside. She took a match from the small tin she kept for the stove and struck it. She dropped the match onto the wool. It smoldered, then caught, the dark fabric curling, turning to ash. She stood and watched it burn. She felt a lightness in her chest she had not felt in years. She was burning her own grave. "What are you doing?" She gasped and spun around. Samuel was standing there, holding an axe, still from chopping wood. He was staring at the barrel, at the last of the gray sleeve as it turned to black char. Clara lifted her chin. "It never fit," she said. He stared at her, his expression unreadable. He looked at the fire, then back at her face, as if seeing it for the first time. He said nothing. He turned, walked to the woodpile, and resumed splitting logs, the sound of the axe biting into the wood unnaturally loud in the still air. That night, Clara could not sleep. She lay on her cot, listening. There was no pacing. The cabin was silent. She crept to the top of the ladder and looked down. He was not in his bed. He was sitting on the floor by the hearth, the loose stone removed. The oilcloth-wrapped blade was across his lap. By the dim light of the embers, he was running a whetstone along the edge of the blade. Shing, shing, shing. The sound was quiet, rhythmic, and terrifying. He was not angry. He was calm, methodical. He was sharpening the blade. He was sharpening it because she had burned her dress. The connection was clear in her mind, and it made her blood run cold. He was preparing for a fight she did not understand. A new kind of fear settled on her, not of him, but for him, and for what was coming. Her world was this cabin, and this man. She knew nothing of him, and he knew everything of her shame. The imbalance was a raw, open wound. One morning, while he was gone, she was searching for a spare blanket. She opened the small, rough-hewn drawer built into the wall beneath his bed, a place she had never looked. It held nothing but a few spare cartridges and a dried twist of tobacco. But at the back, tucked into the corner, was a small, velvet-covered box. Her fingers closed around it. She knew she should not. It was his grave. He had warned her. She opened it. Inside, on a bed of faded white silk, was a wedding ring. It was a simple gold band, but it was worn, the edges soft with time. It was not new. It was not the ring of a man who had ordered a wife by mail. It was the ring of a man who had loved. It was clearly not meant for her. She closed the box, her heart a cold, heavy stone. She put it back, exactly as she had found it. He was not just a killer. He was a widower. Or perhaps something worse. He was a man who had lost, and lost completely. That night, the weight of their combined secrets became too much to bear. He was sitting at the table, a rare thing, inspecting a broken coyote trap. The lamp cast deep shadows across his scarred face. Clara came down the ladder. She stood in the middle of the room. Her hands knotted together. "He was a town official," she said. the words bursting out of her, raw and sudden. Samuel did not look up, but his hand stilled on the metal trap. The man who ruined me, he was a friend of my father's, a pillar of the community. Her voice was flat. Recital. He came to the house when my father was gone. He said I had invited it, that my dress was too tight, that I had looked at him. She was shaking. My father, he knew. I told him. He knew the man had done it, but the man was powerful. He had money. He funded the new church roof. She took a gasping breath. My father disowned me. He cast me out. He said I had brought shame on the house of God. He did it to keep his congregation, to keep his standing. She had never spoken these words aloud. Not to anyone. They left her throat tasting of ash. She waited for the disgust, the judgment, the pity. Samuel Rigg sat for a full minute, unmoving. He did not ask her to elaborate. He did not ask for the man's name. He did not ask a single question. Finally, he put the broken trap down on the table. He stood up. He walked past her, his shoulder almost brushing hers, and opened the cabin door. He stepped out into the blackness and shut the door behind him, leaving her alone in the room. She thought he had left her, that her confession was too much, the final stain he could not abide. She sank onto one of the stools, put her head in her hands, and wept. An hour later, she heard it. It came from the direction of the barn. It was a sound so broken, so full of anguish. It did not seem human. It was a man weeping, not quiet tears, but great, ragged sobs of absolute despair. It was Samuel. He was out there, in the dark, weeping alone. Weeping for her, for his own lost wife, for the cruelty of a world that let such things happen. She did not know, but she knew she was not the only one in this cabin who was broken. She knew his silence was not emptiness, but a wall built to hold back an ocean of pain. The next week, a wagon rattled up the trail. It was not Samuel's. Clara watched from the attic window as a man in a dusty black suit climbed down. He carried a large, worn Bible. He was a traveling preacher. Clara felt a stone drop in her stomach. Samuel came from the barn, his face dark. "The Lord's blessings on this house," the preacher called out, his voice oily and loud. "I am the Reverend Josiah Snow. I have come to offer comfort to the lost sheep." His eyes slid past Samuel and fixed on Clara, who had slowly descended the ladder and was standing in the doorway. "I have heard of you, daughter," the preacher said, stepping onto the porch. "A soul fallen from grace. But rejoice, I am here to save you." "We don't need saving," Samuel said, his voice flat. "We all need saving, my friend." The preacher smiled, a wide, false grin, especially a woman living in such tenuous circumstances. He looked at Clara, his eyes lingering on her. Of course, saving a soul requires sacrifice, a donation to the Lord's work, to cleanse the spirit. He took a step toward Clara. Perhaps the lady and I could pray alone. She could offer her testimony and a contribution. The implication was clear, heavy and foul. Samuel moved. It was not fast, but it was final. He stepped between the preacher and Clara, blocking the door. He was shorter than the preacher, but he seemed to fill the entire porch. "Ride on," Samuel said. The preacher's smile faltered. "Now see here, I am a man of God. You cannot—" Samuel reached out and took the front of the preacher's suit in his fist. He did not raise his voice. "I said, ride on, or I will help you." He pushed the man back, forcing him to stumble off the porch. The preacher sputtered, his face red with fury and fear. He scrambled back onto his wagon. "You will burn for this!" he shrieked, grabbing his reins. "Both of you! You will burn!" He whipped his horse and rattled away, leaving a cloud of dust and righteousness. Clara was leaning against the doorframe, her legs weak, Samuel turned to her. He looked at her, then at the dust cloud, then back at her. He saw the same fear in her eyes that had been there when the drunkard touched her. He turned and walked away, toward the riverbed, needing to be away from her, from the preacher, from himself. Clara watched him go. He had defended her. Twice, he had not touched her, had not offered a single word of comfort, but he had stood for her. She followed him. She did not know why. She found him standing by the dry creek, his back to her, his shoulders rigid. She walked up behind him. He did not turn. She did not know what to say. There were no words for what lay between them. She reached out, her hand trembling. She did not touch his arm or his back. She gently took his right hand. It was rough as bark, scarred and hard from work and, she knew, from violence. She lifted his knuckles to her lips and pressed a kiss there. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of gratitude, of shared brokenness. It was an offering. "Take all that's left of me," she whispered, the words so quiet they were almost carried away by the wind. Samuel's hand jerked in hers, a violent tremor, as if she had burned him. He turned, his face a mask of such profound pain that she stepped back. He looked at her mouth, at the tears standing in her eyes. He looked at the hand she had kissed. He did not touch her. He did not pull her close. He did not say her name. He only sank to his knees in the dust at her feet, his head bowed, as if he were the one confessing, and she were the one with the power to grant absolution. The kiss in the dust was a turning point. It was a line drawn and crossed, though not in the way of a husband and wife. When Samuel rose from his knees, he did not look at her. He simply turned and walked back to the cabin, his back straight, his hands fisted at his sides. Clara watched him go, her lips still tingling from the feel of his rough, scarred skin. She had offered him the broken pieces of herself, and he had not run. He had knelt. Life, however, did not wait for grand gestures. It was a thing of grit and daily need. The silence between them returned, but its quality had changed. It was no longer the cold, empty silence of two strangers. It was a shared silence, heavy with things understood, a space they now occupied together. The first true change came with a dog. It was a stray, a wretched thing of ribs and matted fur that had crawled into the sliver of shade under the barn. Clara found it when she went to gather eggs. It was dying. One of its hind legs was a raw, bloody mass, likely caught in a trap and chewed free. It snapped at her with the last of its strength, its yellow eyes wild with pain and terror. Clara backed away, her heart clenching. She went inside the cabin. Samuel was cleaning his rifle at the table. "There is a dog," she said, her voice small. "Under the barn. It is hurt, badly." Samuel did not look up. "It is dying. Leave it be. The coyotes will finish it." "No," Clara said. His hand stopped moving. He looked up, his gray eyes flat. "No. We cannot just leave it. It is not our concern. It is nature. It is suffering," she insisted, her voice gaining a strength she did not know she possessed. "I will not leave it." She took the canteen from the table and a small tin bowl. She went to the well, filled the bowl, and walked back to the barn. The dog snarled, dragging itself back against the wall. She set the bowl down, just outside the shade, and backed away. She sat on the ground, 10 yards away, and waited. The sun beat down. An hour passed. Samuel never came out. Finally, the dog's thirst overcame its fear. It dragged its ruined body forward, lapping at the water with a desperate, pathetic sound. Clara stayed there all afternoon. When the sun began to dip, Samuel came out. He said nothing to her. He walked past her, into the barn. She heard him rummaging. He came back out with a thick leather glove, the kind used for handling barbed wire, and a scrap of dried jerky. He walked to the dog. It snarled. He ignored it, tossing the jerky. The dog sniffed it, then devoured it. "Hold its head," he said.
Clara scrambled forward. "It will bite."
"It will try." He put on the glove. He knelt, and in one swift, economical movement, he seized the dog by the scruff of its neck, pinning it. The dog yelped, snapping, but Samuel's grip was iron. "Hold its jaws. Now!" Clara, her heart pounding, knelt in the dirt. She forced the dog's head down, her fingers pressing its lips against its own teeth, just as she had seen a blacksmith do with a stubborn horse. Samuel examined the leg. His touch was not gentle, but it was efficient. "It is torn, not broken, poisoned, from the metal." He went back into the cabin. He returned with his whiskey flask and a clean rag. He knelt again. "Hold him!" He poured the raw spirit directly into the wound. The dog shrieked, a high, thin sound of agony, and thrashed, its body convulsing. Clara held on, tears streaming down her face, whispering, "I am sorry, I am sorry," over and over. "It is clean," Samuel said. Standing up, he wrapped the leg loosely with the rag. He looked at Clara, her face streaked with dust and tears, her hands covered in the dog's saliva and blood. "It will likely die by morning." He left her there. Clara sat with the dog, which was now trembling violently, its breath coming in short, shallow pants. She did not go to the attic. She sat in the dirt, guarding the animal, until the moon was high and cold. When she woke, stiff and chilled, the sun was just cresting the canyon. The dog was still breathing. It was watching her. She brought it more water. When Samuel emerged, he looked at the dog, then at her. He gave a single, curt nod. "Fool thing," he muttered, but he went and cut another piece of jerky. They did not speak of it, but the dog lived. They called him Scrap. He was a surly, ugly animal, loyal to no one, but he would follow Clara from the cabin to the chicken coop, and he would lie by the hearth near Samuel's feet. He was their first shared responsibility. The dog's survival seemed to wake something in Clara, a defiant speck of hope. She had come here to die, or at least to disappear. But the land, for all its cruelty, was also honest. It rewarded work. She found a small patch of earth behind the cabin, near the well, that was protected from the worst of the wind. She remembered the small, cloth-wrapped packet of seeds her sister, Mary, had pressed into her hand as she left. To plant something green. Mary had wept. She got a shovel from the barn and tried to break the ground. It was like trying to shovel iron. The earth was packed hard as stone, riddled with rocks. She worked for an hour, her hands blistering, succeeding only in scraping a few inches of dust aside. She gave up, frustrated and aching, leaving the shovel where it lay. The next morning, when she went to the well, she stopped. The patch of earth, perhaps 10 feet square, was tilled. The soil was dark and broken, the large stones piled neatly to the side. Samuel was nowhere to be seen. He was already gone, checking his traps. Clara stared at the patch of turned earth. He had done this in the dark, or in the pre-dawn, another act of secret, practical care. She ran her fingers through the loose, cool soil. She planted the seeds, beans, squash, and a few hardy herbs. She watered them every day. Samuel watched her, his face impassive. But one afternoon, he took the shovel and spent 2 hours digging a shallow, winding trench from the well's overflow to her small garden. He showed her how to unblock it, to let the precious water trickle down and soak the roots, and how to block it again, to conserve every drop. He did not call it a garden. He called it the patch, but it was theirs. The summer rains began, and with them, new problems. The roof, damaged in that first storm, began to leak again, not just in the attic, but over the main table. A steady, maddening drip, drip, drip into a tin pot. Clara was ready to move the table. Samuel was not. He hauled a ladder to the side of the cabin. "I need a hand," he called. It was not a request. She followed him up. The roof was steep, the shingles brittle and cracked. It was terrifying. The world seemed to tilt, the red rock canyon spinning out below them. "Sit," he commanded, pointing to the peak of the roof. "And do not move unless I tell you." She scrambled up and sat, her skirts hitched around her knees, her heart in her throat. For 4 hours, they worked. It was a rhythm. He would rip up a section of broken shingles. She would hand him the new ones from the stack he had hauled up. He would nail them in, his hammer strokes fast and precise. "Shingle." She would pass it. "Nails." She would hand him a few from the canvas pouch. Once, his foot slipped on a patch of wet moss. He slid, grabbing for purchase. Clara cried out, her hand flying to her mouth. He caught himself, his boots finding a crossbeam. He did not look at her. He only righted himself, took a deep breath, and held out his hand. "Hammer," he said, his voice tight. She passed it to him, her hand shaking so badly she almost dropped it. When they were finished, they sat on the peak for a moment, the sun warm on their backs, the entire valley spread out below them. The air was clean after the rain. "It will hold," he said. It was the longest sentence he had offered in a week. "Yes," she said, her voice thin. "It will." They had fixed the roof, together. The next day, he met her by the chicken coop. He was holding his pistol, the heavy Colt that usually rested on his hip. He held it out to her, butt first. Clara recoiled, her hands flying up. "No, I cannot." "You will," he said. His voice was flat, without negotiation. I hate them," she whispered, her eyes on the dark metal. "Guns." "Hate it all you want," he said, pushing it into her hand. Her hand sank under the unexpected weight. "But you will learn to use it, out here. Kindness do not stop bullets, and it do not stop a coyote from getting your hens, or a man from getting you." He set up 3 empty tins on a fence post. He stood behind her. He did not touch her, but she could feel his presence, his heat, his absolute focus. "Hold it with both hands," he commanded. "Straighten your arms. Look down the barrel. Put the small notch over the target. Squeeze the trigger. Do not pull it." Her hands were slick with sweat. The gun trembled. She closed her eyes and pulled the trigger. The explosion was deafening. The gun kicked back, slamming into her wrists, and she cried out, dropping it in the dust. The shot had gone wide, nowhere near the tins. She stood, shaking, her ears ringing, tears of fright and frustration in her eyes. "Pick it up," he said. "I cannot." "Pick it up." She bent, her fingers clumsy, and picked it up. Again. She missed again, and again. She shot until her shoulders ached and the smell of sulfur and smoke clung to her clothes. She did not hit a single tin. "Enough for today," he said, finally. He took the pistol, reloaded it without a word, and slid it back into his holster. She rubbed her aching wrists. "I am useless." "You are new," he said, turning to walk away. "You pulled. Every time, tomorrow, you will squeeze." And she did. Every day. For a week, he made her practice. 10 shots. He would stand, watching, silent. On the 5th day, she hit the tin. It rang out with a satisfying plink and flew off the post. Clara gasped. Staring, she had done it. She turned to Samuel, a look of shocked triumph on her face. He was not looking at the tin. He was looking at her. His expression was not one of praise, but of quiet, grim satisfaction. A few days later, the change he had wrought in her found its voice. She was feeding Scrap the leftover biscuit from breakfast. The dog, no longer skeletal, was clumsy, his newly healed legs still stiff. He chased a lizard, yelping, and then tumbled head over heels in the dust, coming up with a bewildered look on his face. A sound bubbled up in Clara's throat. It was sharp, rusty, and uncontrolled. It was a laugh. She clapped her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide. She had not laughed. Not in years. The sound was foreign, like a stranger's voice. She looked over at Samuel, who was splitting wood by the barn. He had frozen, his axe buried in the log. He was watching her. He did not smile. He did not speak. He just watched, his gaze intense, and for a fleeting second, the coldness in his eyes was replaced by something else, a quiet, fierce protectiveness. He had seen her broken. He had seen her weeping. Now he had seen her laugh. He pulled his axe free and swung it again, the sound of the crack splitting the air, breaking the moment. But Clara felt the heat in her cheeks, a flush that was not from shame, but from life. The evenings were the hardest. The unspoken thing between them had grown. Now that the pacing had stopped, now that the shared work of the day was done, they sat in the small cabin, the silence thick and charged. The chill of the high desert nights returned. He would build a fire in the hearth. She would sit on her stool, mending, the light of the flames on her face. He would sit on the floor, his back against the wall, oiling the leather harness, or sometimes cleaning the blade. He never sat near her, but the room was small. The heat from the fire was intense. It was unbearable. She would watch his hands, scarred, hard, and capable. He had taught her to shoot, tilled her garden, fixed her roof. He had knelt for her, and he had never, not once, laid a hand on her in anything but necessity or defense. He would watch her. He would watch her fingers as she sewed. He would watch the firelight catch the strands of her hair. The heat in the room was not just from the fire. It was the heat of two people, starved of touch, bound by a piece of paper, and separated by a chasm of pain. He was a man of honor, she realized. Though the world called him a killer, he had bought her, but he would not take her. He was waiting for something, an invitation she was too terrified to give. They were close. They were so close. But they never crossed the line. The fragile peace was shattered on a Tuesday. Samuel had ridden into town for flour and salt. Clara was hanging their shirts on the line, the wind snapping at the wet canvas. Scrap was asleep in a patch of sun. She heard the mule long before she saw it. He was riding hard. That alone was wrong. Samuel never hurried. He pulled the mule to a stop, not even bothering to hitch it. He slid off, his face a mask of stone, harder than she had ever seen it. "He's coming," he said. Clara's hands froze on the clothespin. "Who?" He walked past her, into the cabin. He threw the sack of flour on the table. Then he placed a single, folded piece of paper beside it. It was an official letter, bearing the town magistrate's seal. "This came by telegraph, for the magistrate. He thought you should know." Her fingers were numb. She opened the letter. It was polite, official. It stated that a Mr. Silas Croft, a prominent investor and town official from her former home, was arriving in 2 days' time, along with 2 associates. He was inquiring as to the welfare of Clara, the daughter of his dear friend, the preacher. Clara's vision tunneled. The world went silent. The wind died. The sun went cold. Silas Croft. The name, the smell of brandy and cigars, the parlor, the door locking. She swayed, her hand gripping the table. "No," she whispered. He cannot come here." "He is," Samuel said, his voice a low growl. "He is wealthy, powerful. He is likely the man who bought the mine rights. He is the one," she choked out. "Samuel, he is the man who ruined me." The silence in the cabin was absolute. Samuel's face, which had been hard, now seemed to be carved from gray granite. The scar on his jaw pulsed, white and angry. He turned. He walked to the barn. She heard him moving, the jingle of a bridle. He came back, not with the mule, but with his horse, A fast, strong bay she had only seen him ride when he was hunting. It was saddled. Saddlebags were strapped to the back. He grabbed his heavy coat from the peg, the one she had worn in the storm. "Take it," he said, pushing the reins into her hand. "There is food, water, and my coat. Ride north. Do not stop. Do not talk to anyone. Ride until you hit Wyoming territory. Find a town. Change your name." Clara stared at the reins. She looked at the horse. A picture of escape, freedom, safety. "What about you?" she asked, her voice hollow. "I will meet him," Samuel said. "I will tell him you are gone." "He will hurt you," she whispered. Or you will hurt him. They will hang you." "That is my concern. Go," he urged, his voice rough. "You have to go. You cannot see him. You cannot be here." She looked at the horse. She thought of the cold, empty north. She thought of running, of being the ruined preacher's daughter all over again, in a new, strange town. Then she looked at the cabin. She looked at the small, tilled garden patch, the green shoots just beginning to break the soil. She looked at the roof they had fixed together. She looked at Scrap, who had lifted his head and was whining at the tension in the air. She looked at Samuel. His gray eyes were filled with a desperate, raw urgency. He was trying to save her. She let go of the reins. "No," she said. He grabbed her arm. "Clara, you do not understand. Men like him, they do not stop. He is not coming to see you. He is coming to take you, or to finish what he started. You must ride." She pulled her arm from his grasp. She stood tall, her fear a cold, hard stone in her belly, but her voice steady. "You did not run from your ghosts. Samuel, they are still here. I hear you pacing. I see you with the blade. You face them every night." She looked him straight in the eye. "Why should I?" He stared at her, speechless. The broken woman he had bought for passage money was gone. In her place was someone else, someone who had hit a tin can from 20 yards, someone who had fixed a roof, someone who had kissed his scarred hand. "I am not running," she said. "This is my home. He is not welcome here." The night that followed was a living thing, a crouching beast in the darkness. They did not eat, they did not speak. The threat of the next day's sun was all that existed. Samuel did not go to his bed. He sat in the chair by the door, his rifle across his lap. He was watching the trail. He was waiting. Clara went to the attic. She lay on her cot, but sleep was impossible. The old fear, the fear she had felt in that parlor with Silas Croft, was back. It was a cold, slick thing, wrapping around her. She began to shake. It started in her hands, then her legs, then her whole body. A violent, uncontrollable trembling that rattled the very cot. She could hear her father's voice. "Harlot! Disgrace!" She could smell the brandy. She could not be alone. Not tonight. She climbed down the ladder. The main room was dark, lit only by the last red embers in the hearth. Samuel was a shadow in the chair, a statue of watchful violence. He heard her, the slight shift of his head. I am cold," she whispered, her teeth chattering. It was not a lie. She was frozen, deep in her bones. He did not speak for a long time. The only sound was her shaking. He stood up, the rifle in one hand. He walked to his bed. He pulled back the heavy wool blanket. "Here," he said. It was not an invitation to his bed. It was an offering of sanctuary. Clara crept forward and slid under the blanket, still in her day dress. The bed was narrow. It smelled of him, of soap and leather, and the faint, metallic scent of gun oil. She curled into a tight ball, but the shaking would not stop. She heard him move. He did not get in the chair. He lay down, not under the blanket, but on top of it. He lay beside her, a rigid, warm weight. He was fully dressed, his boots still on. He was a barrier, a wall of warmth and muscle between her and the door. He did not touch her. He lay stiff as a board, one hand resting on the floor beside the bed, ready to spring up. She was still shaking. She could not stop. The terror was too deep. After a long, agonizing minute, she felt his other hand, the left one, move. It was slow, hesitant. He did not touch her back or her waist. He just rested his hand on her shoulder. His hand was heavy, warm. It did not grasp. It did not demand. It just held. He was unsure how to hold anything so broken. He was terrified of breaking her more. The solid, grounding weight of his hand on her shoulder, the warmth of his body beside her, a living, breathing shield. The shaking began to subside. The ice in her belly began to thaw. She was not alone. She did not know when she fell asleep, but she did. Her face turned toward his back, her breath quiet, her body finally still. Samuel Rigg did not sleep. He lay awake in the dark, feeling the fragile bird of her breathing, his hand on her shoulder, and he watched the door, waiting for the dawn. Clara woke to gray light. She was alone in the bed. She sat up, her mind foggy, the events of the night rushing back. Samuel! The cabin was empty. The rifle was gone from its rack. A chill hit her. She looked at the chair by the door. His heavy coat, the one he had offered her for her escape, was folded neatly on the seat. Her eyes flew to the hearth. The loose stone was pulled aside. The dark hollow was empty. The oilcloth and the blade were gone. He had gone to town. He had gone to face Silas Croft alone, armed with his past, to protect her future. Clara woke to the gray, metallic light of dawn. The cabin was cold. The place beside her on the narrow bed, the space Samuel had occupied as a rigid, warm barrier, was empty. She sat up, the wool blanket pooling in her lap. The shaking had stopped. In its place was a cold, sharp clarity. Samuel? The cabin was silent. His rifle was gone from the wall pegs. Her eyes flew to the chair by the door. His heavy canvas coat, the one he had tried to give her for her escape, was folded neatly on the seat. A final, protective gesture, a farewell. She threw the blanket off and ran to the hearth. The loose stone was pulled aside. The dark hollow behind it, a gaping, empty mouth. The oilcloth-wrapped blade was gone. He had left his coat, his protection against the elements, but he had taken his weapon, his protection against men. No, she whispered. She scrambled up the ladder, her hands clumsy. She did not bother with her bonnet or her good shoes. She pulled on her sturdy boots, her fingers fumbling with the laces. He had gone to face Silas Croft alone. He had gone to stand in her place, to take her past onto himself and bury it with his own. She ran outside, the cold air hitting her face. She would not take his horse. That was his for fighting or for fleeing. She ran to the small corral, her hands raw as she fumbled with the mule's harness. She hitched the animal to the small, rickety wagon. Scrap, the dog, whined at her feet. Sensing the panic, "Stay," she commanded, her voice sharp. "Guard the house." She slapped the reins, and the mule lurched forward. The ride to town was a nightmare of jolting wheels and blinding sun. The 5 miles had never seemed so long. She did not cry. Her fear was too cold for tears. It had burned down to a hard, angry ember in her stomach. She was not the ruined preacher's daughter, cowering in a stagecoach. She was a woman riding to stop a man from dying for her. She saw the town before she heard it. It was quiet, terribly quiet. It was mid-morning, a time when the street should have been busy with wagons and miners, but it was still. A crowd was gathered. They were not cheering, they were not talking, they were watching. A ring of silent, fearful spectators. They were clustered in front of the saloon, their bodies forming a grim arena. Clara pulled the mule to a halt, her heart seizing. There, in the center of the dusty street, stood Samuel. He was alone, his hands loose at his sides. He was not wearing his pistol. He was just standing. Facing him were 3 men. Two were rough, the kind of men who lived by the gun, their faces hard and bearded, their clothes stained. The third man was Silas Croft. Clara's breath stopped. He was just as she remembered, only older. He was tall, dressed in a fine black suit and a cravat, his silver hair combed back. He looked clean, wealthy, and powerful. He looked like a disease in the middle of the dusty, raw town. Samuel's presence held them. The air was thick with it. The hush from the crowd was not respect. It was the terror of a town that knew his reputation, a town holding its breath, waiting for the blood. Clara slid down from the wagon. Her boots hit the dust. The crowd stirred. They saw her. Whispers broke out. "It's her, Riggs' woman." One of the hired men, a large man with a tobacco-stained beard, saw her. He grinned, showing broken teeth. He looked at Croft. "This the one, boss, the little preacher's girl you was talking about?" He then turned his head and spat a thick stream of tobacco juice into the dust, just inches from the hem of Clara's dress. It was a calculated, filthy insult. Samuel did not move, but his shoulders tightened. His eyes, fixed on Croft, narrowed to gray slits. Silas Croft held up a hand, silencing his man. He smiled. It was the same smile he had given her in the parlor, a smile of absolute ownership. "Clara," he said, his voice smooth and educated, rolling over the dust. "My dear, you left so suddenly. All those years ago, I thought our transaction was incomplete." He took a step toward her, away from Samuel, as if Samuel were nothing more than a piece of furniture. "I have come a long way. I find you in reduced circumstances, living with this thing." He gestured to Samuel with contempt. "But I am a generous man. I am prepared to overlook your lapse. You will come with me." One of the men laughed. "Heard she was quite the purchase, boss." Samuel's voice cut through the air, low and deadly. "Say her name again." Croft paused, his smile tightening. He looked at Samuel, truly seeing him for the first time. "I am speaking to her, not you. This is not your concern." "She is my wife," Samuel said. The words were a claim, a line drawn in the dirt. Croft laughed, a short, sharp bark. "Wife? You paid her passage. I was the one who broke her in. I believe that gives me the prior claim. She was, and is, bought." That was the word. Bought. Clara's vision went red. The whispers of the town. She's bartered her soul for land, her father's face, the cold attic, the fear, the shame. It all coalesced into a single, blinding point of rage. She began to walk. She walked past the hired man who had spat. She walked past Samuel. She walked directly up to Silas Croft, who was still smiling, his eyes glittering with triumph and possession. The town watched. Mr. Harris from the Mercantile, Mrs. Pruitt, her face pinched with horrified glee. The entire street was frozen in awe. Clara stopped 1 foot from him. She looked at the man who had stolen her life, her name, her honor. She saw the small, smug smile on his face. She raised her hand, and with all the strength of her body, she slapped him across the face. The sound was not a slap. It was a crack, like a gunshot, echoing in the dead, silent street. Croft's head snapped back. His smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure, stunned shock. A red print of her hand bloomed instantly on his pale, clean-shaven cheek. For a second, the world stopped. Then, his face contorted. The civilized mask was gone, replaced by the animal she remembered. You harlot!" he roared, and he lunged. He was not coming to hit her. He was coming to grab her. His hands clawed. He never reached her. Samuel moved. He was not there. And then he was a silent shadow between her and Croft. There was no sound of a draw, no flash of steel. The blade was just in his hand, the dark, heavy knife from under the hearth. its edge gleaming dully in the morning sun. Croft, blind with rage, ran right into the threat. Samuel did not thrust. He did not slash. His hand moved, a short, fast, economical motion, cold, fast, and quiet. Silas Croft stopped. He made a sound, a high, strangled gasp. He stared at Samuel, his eyes wide with confusion. He lifted a hand to his face. A thin red line appeared, as if drawn by a pen, from the high curve of his cheekbone down to the line of his jaw. Then the blood came. It welled up, dark and thick, pouring through his fingers, staining his white cravat and his black suit. He screamed. It was a high, thin sound of pain and outrage, not the sound of a man, but of a spoiled child. He stumbled back, clutching his face, his two men rushing to him. Samuel Rigg stood perfectly still, the bloody blade held low at his side. He had not killed. He had not maimed. He had marked. He had given the man a scar, a mirror to his own, a permanent reminder. "He tried to kill me!" Croft shrieked, the blood making a mockery of his fine clothes. "Arrest him! He tried to murder me! Hang him!" The town, released from its paralysis, exploded. "He cut him!" Right in the street. "He's a killer! We always said it!" The door of the sheriff's office burst open. Sheriff Brody, a heavy man with a weary face and a large mustache, stormed out, his own pistol drawn. "Rigg, drop the blade! Drop it now!" Samuel's shoulders, which had been tense, relaxed. He had done what he came to do. He let the blade fall from his fingers. It hit the dust with a soft, final thud. He raised his hands, palms out. "He attacked my wife," Samuel said, his voice calm. "I saw what I saw," Brody snapped, his eyes on the bleeding, important man. He nodded to his deputy. "Cuff him." The deputy, a young, nervous man, hurried forward and locked iron cuffs on Samuel's wrists. "Sheriff!" Clara ran forward, grabbing Brody's arm. "You cannot do this. He was protecting me. That man, Silas Croft, he threatened me. He assaulted me." Brody pulled his arm from her grasp, his face hard. He looked at Croft, who was being helped into the doctor's office by his men. He looked at the blade in the dust. He looked at Samuel, the town's pariah, and he looked at Clara, the ruined woman. "Ma'am, what I saw was your husband assault a man with a deadly weapon in the middle of my town. Mr. Croft is a notable citizen. I cannot have murderers running loose." "He is not a murderer," Clara cried. "Lock him up," Brody ordered, jerking his head toward the jail. The town's prejudice, which had been a quiet, simmering thing, now turned on them both. It was a release. They finally had a reason to cast out the man who frightened them. "He's a menace! Mrs.!" Pruitt yelled, her voice righteous. "Hang him! We do not want his kind here." "And her!" another woman shrieked. "She's no better! A harlot causing all this!" They were a mob, and Clara and Samuel were the focus of their fear and hate. The deputy shoved Samuel toward the jail. Samuel went, his back straight, his head high. He did not look at Clara. She ran after them, to the small, squat stone building that served as the jail. She stumbled into the dark, foul-smelling office. Brody was already behind his desk. "Sheriff, please," she begged, tears finally streaming down her face, cutting clean paths through the dust on her cheeks. "You must listen. That man, he is evil. He is the reason I am here." Brody sighed, leaning back in his chair. He was a tired, cynical man, caught between a powerful investor and a local killer. "Ma'am, I do not care about the why of it. I care about the what, and what I saw was a knifing." "He attacked me. He grabbed for me. You all saw it." "Mr. Croft says he was defending himself from your assault. You slapped him first, did you not?" Clara froze. Yes, but he..." "There it is. You started it. Rigg finished it. He is under arrest for aggravated assault and disturbing the peace."
"Then let me pay his fine,"
she said, her voice desperate.
"What is it? We have a mule. We have tools."
The sheriff looked at her, his eyes cold. All pity gone. He had made his choice. He was siding with the money, with the power. "The bail," he said, "is set at $500. Clara felt the floor drop out from under her. $500. It was not a fine. It was a death sentence. It was a sum so vast, so impossible. They could not pay it in a lifetime. "That is, we cannot," she whispered.
"That is more than the cabin, the land, everything."
"That is the price," Brody said. "Mr. Croft is a very important man, and he is very badly cut. He says he might lose the sight in his eye."
"That is a lie."
"It is his word against yours, ma'am, and his word is worth $500. Yours." He looked her up and down, at her dusty dress, her ruined reputation. "Yours is not."
"Please,"
she sobbed, sinking to her knees.
"He is a good man. He saved my life."
The sheriff stood up, his face hardening into disgust. He rounded the desk and looked down at her. "Ma'am, he is a killer, and you are what you are. Go home. He stays here until the circuit judge arrives in a month. And when that judge hears from Mr. Croft, your man is going to hang—" He leaned in, his voice dropping to a cruel whisper. "She ain't worth blood." He yanked open the door. "Get out!" The ride home was a blur of dust and despair. The town watched her go, their faces cold and closed. She was friendless. She was alone. When she reached the cabin, the sun was setting, painting the rocks a deep, bloody red. The emptiness was a physical blow. His folded coat was still on the chair. The hollow in the hearth was still open. The silence was the old, cold silence, the one that ate her alive. She stumbled out of the cabin, her legs unable to hold her. She fell to her knees in the dirt. She crawled to the small patch of turned earth by the well, their garden. The tiny green shoots of the beans were just visible, fragile and green against the dark soil. She put her hand on the earth he had tilled for her, and she sobbed. They were not quiet tears. They were the racking, hopeless animal sounds of pure grief she had once heard from him in the dark. She wept for him, for his sacrifice. She wept for herself, for the ruin she had brought to the only man who had ever shown her honor. She stayed there until the sky was black and studded with cold, indifferent stars. A sound made her look up, a wagon. She scrambled to her feet, her hand flying to her throat. Was it Croft's men? A woman's voice called out, "Mrs. Rigg?" A small wagon pulled into the moonlight. A woman held the reins, a lantern glowing by her side. Clara recognized her, a quiet woman who sometimes came to the mercantile. Sarah Bishop, a widow.
Yes,"
Clara whispered, wiping her face. Mrs. Bishop climbed down. She was older, her face lined with her own grief, but her eyes were kind. "My name is Sarah. I live on the North Creek." She twisted her hands in her apron.
I saw what happened today, in town."
"Then you know," Clara said, her voice dead. "It is over." "No," the widow said, her voice suddenly fierce.
"I knew your husband, years ago, my late husband, Ephraim.
He was not a good man. He drank. He used his hands." She looked down. "One night, he came home, blind drunk, with a loaded pistol. He was going to finish it, for me and my boy. Samuel Rigg was passing by. He heard me screaming." Clara stared at her. "He came in," Sarah whispered. "He did not draw his gun. He did not pull a blade. He just talked to Ephraim. And when Ephraim would not listen, he took the pistol away from him. He stopped him. He sat with my husband until he cried himself to sleep. Then he gave me $20 and told me to take my boy and ride west. He saved my life." The widow looked up, her eyes shining in the lantern light.
I heard what Sheriff Brody set for bail.
It is an evil thing.
I have nothing,
Clara said. It is impossible.
It is not impossible. It is just hard.
Sarah reached into her wagon and pulled out a folded, yellowed piece of paper, tied with a string. This is an old deed, for a silver claim up in the Three Forks Canyon. It was my husband's. It is played out, mostly. It is not worth much. But it is filed. It is legal. It has value. She pressed the deed into Clara's numb hand. Why? Clara asked.
I am paying a debt. Samuel Rigg gave me and my son a life. I am giving him his back.
The widow touched Clara's arm.
Do not let them win.
She climbed back onto her wagon and, with a nod, disappeared into the night. Clara stood alone in the moonlight, the deed in her hand. It was not $500, but it was something. It was not hope. It was a tool. She turned and walked back into the cabin. She lit the lamp. The light filled the small, empty room. She ain't worth blood. Clara walked to her cracked trunk and opened it. At the bottom was her mother's Bible, the only thing she had from her old life. It had a small, tarnished silver clasp. She put the Bible on the table. She pulled up the loose floorboard where she kept her 2 emergency silver dollars. She put them on the table. She looked at the 3 hens, sleeping in the crate she had built for them. She looked at the mule, standing exhausted in the corral. She looked at Samuel's tools, hanging neatly on the wall. His hammer, his saw, his rifle. She took the folded coat from the chair, pressed her face into it, inhaling the faint scent of him, of dust and gun oil. Then she folded it and put it on the table with the other things. She would sell it all. She would sell the mule, the tools, the rifle, the hens. She would sell her mother's Bible. She would sell this worthless deed. She would collect every coin, every last cent, until she had $500. She did not know if she was worth the blood, but she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that he was. Clara did not sleep. The moment the widow's wagon disappeared into the darkness, she began to move. She was a woman possessed, not by grief, but by a cold, sharp fire. She walked back to town. The 5 miles were nothing. She was not a person. She was a purpose. She had carried Samuel's blade with her, hidden in the folds of her skirt, after the sheriff had dragged him away, after the crowd had dispersed. She had seen it lying in the dust. She had snatched it up, a piece of his soul left behind, and hidden it. It was heavy, and it gave her strength. She arrived as the sun was beginning to touch the horizon. She did not go to the jail. She went to the mercantile, the livery, the saloon. She sold the mule and the wagon. She got $12. She sold the 3 hens. She got 60 cents. She sold Samuel's rifle. The saloon keeper, his eyes gleaming, gave her $25 for it. She sold his tools, the hammer, the saw, the axe, the harness. Mr. Harris, the mercantile owner, bought them all for $6, his face a mixture of pity and greed. She sold her mother's Bible with the silver clasp. She got $1 for it, from a woman who did not meet her eyes. She sold the folded coat from the chair, the one she had worn in the storm. It went for $2. She stood in the center of town, the small, heavy cloth bag in her hand. She had $46.60, and she had the widow's deed. It was nightfall when she walked into the jailhouse. The lamp was burning low. Sheriff Brody was at his desk, a bottle of whiskey and a glass at his elbow. He looked up, his eyes bleary, and a slow, unpleasant smile spread across his face. "Back so soon, Mrs. Rigg?" he drawled.
"Come to your senses." "I have the money," Clara said. Her voice was flat, dead. She dumped the bag of coins on his desk, the silver and copper scattered across the wood. "And this?" She placed the widow's deed on top of the pile. Brody laughed, a short,
ugly sound. He ignored the deed and began to count the coins, sweeping them into his palm. He finished and looked at her, his smile gone, replaced by contempt. "This is $46 and change." He flicked the deed with his finger. "And this is a piece of worthless paper for a dried-up hole in the ground. I told you, $500. You are short, ma'am. You are very short." Clara stood, her hands clenched at her sides. She had nothing left. She had sold their entire life, and it was not enough. "Please," she whispered. The fire was gone, leaving only the cold ash of despair. "He is a good man." "He is a cutthroat," Brody said, leaning back in his chair, the wood creaking. He took a slow drink of his whiskey. "And you are a desperate woman, a ruined woman, with a killer for a husband." He set the glass down. He stared at her, a long, assessing look that stripped her bare. $500 is the price," he said, his voice dropping. "But maybe there is another way to pay. A fine like this. It takes a lot out of a man. A sheriff has needs. It is lonely work." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. She knew this. This was the world. This was the bargain. The parlor, the brandy, the locked door. It was always the same. "Mr. Croft is asleep," Brody said, his voice a greasy whisper. "The town is asleep. No one would know. Just a private settlement between you and the law." He stood up. He was a large man, his shadow swallowing her. "You convince me that Samuel Rigg is worth letting go. Convince me that you are grateful." He took a step around the desk. "He is in the back cell. He is hurt. My deputy was rough with him. He might not last until the judge comes." He was giving her no choice. He was telling her that her body was the price for Samuel's life. "She ain't worth blood," he had said. He was wrong. He was going to take it all. Clara looked at the floor. She let her shoulders slump. She let the tears that were waiting well up in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered, her voice a broken thing. I understand." The sheriff's face relaxed into a triumphant, ugly grin. He had won. She was just what he thought she was. He reached for her, his hand large and damp, aiming for her shoulder. "That is a good girl. You just—" Clara moved. She was not the weeping woman from the field. She was not the preacher's ruined daughter. She was the woman who had watched Samuel Rigg sharpen his blade in the firelight. She drew the knife from the folds of her dress. The long, dark, heavy blade was in her hand, the movement as fast and silent as the one Samuel had used on Croft. She did not threaten. She did not scream. She pressed the razor-sharp point of the blade against the soft, whiskered skin of Sheriff Brody's throat. He froze. His hand, the one reaching for her, stopped in midair. His eyes widened, the whiskey fog clearing, replaced by pure, stark terror. He could feel the cold steel pricking his skin. "You move," Clara whispered, her voice no longer human, but a cold, flat hiss, like the blade itself. "And I will open you from your throat to your belly. I will leave you on this floor for your deputy to find in the morning." Brody's breath hitched. He tried to speak. "You thought I was alone," she continued, her voice gaining a terrible, quiet strength. "You thought I was just a woman. You thought you could take what you wanted, just like he did. You are the same." She pressed the blade a fraction deeper. A single, tiny bead of blood welled up and trickled down his neck. "You will go to that cell. You will unlock it. You will give me the keys. You will tell me my husband is free to go, that the fine is paid. You will say Silas Croft dropped the charges." I cannot," he stammered, his eyes bulging. "You will," she said, "or I will scream. I will scream so loud this entire town wakes up. And I will tell them you attacked me. I will tell them you tried to force me. And I will show them the blood on this knife. And when Samuel Rigg finds out what you tried to do, he will not give you a scar. He will burn this town to the ground just to find you, and he will not be as kind as I am being." Brody knew she was telling the truth. He knew the look in Riggs' eyes. He knew his own reputation. He knew he was beaten. "Yes," he gasped, his whole body trembling. "Yes, all right, please, take the knife away. The keys," Clara commanded. He fumbled at his belt, his hands shaking, and held the iron ring out to her. She snatched them. "Now, walk to the cell." She held the blade to his back, prodding him forward. He stumbled down the short hall to the back cells. There were two. Samuel was in the one on the right, slumped on a cot, his back to them. "Open it," she said. Brody fumbled with the key, his sweat smelling sour. The lock clicked. Clara shoved him hard. He stumbled into the opposite wall. "Get back to your desk, and if you make a sound, if you even look toward that door, I will come back." He scrambled away. Clara pushed the cell door open. "Samuel!" He did not move. "Samuel!" she cried, her voice breaking. She ran to him, touching his shoulder. He groaned and rolled over. His face was a ruin. His left eye was swollen shut, his lip split. His shirt was torn, and his ribs were dark with bruises. They had beaten him, badly. "Clara?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. He tried to sit up, hissing in pain. What did you do?" "I paid the fine," she said, her voice shaking as she pulled him to his feet, taking his weight. "We are going home." He was confused, in pain. "The money. You did not have—" "Hush, just walk." She half carried, half dragged him out of the cell, through the office. Brody was at his desk, his face pale, staring at his whiskey. He did not look up. Clara pushed Samuel out into the cold night air. The deed and the bag of coins were still on the desk. She had left them. She had bought him, not with money, but with terror. The walk home took hours. They did not have a mule, or a wagon, or a horse. They had only each other. Samuel leaned on her, every step a fresh agony for him. He kept asking, "What did you do, Clara? Tell me, what did you trade?" "I sold everything," she said, which was the truth. "The mule, the rifle, everything." "That was not enough. I know what Brody is. Tell me what he did to you." His voice was a low, desperate growl. They were a mile from the cabin, the first light of dawn painting the sky. When she stopped, she turned to face him, supporting him. "He did nothing," she said. She pulled the long, dark blade from her belt and showed it to him. His one good eye widened. "I offered him a bargain of my own," she said. Samuel looked at the blade. He looked at her face, pale and tear-streaked, but hard as forged steel. He looked at the blood on the tip of the knife. Brody's blood. He understood. She had not been a victim. She had been a warrior. He reached out, his hand trembling, not from pain, but from emotion. He touched her face. It was the first time. Not a hand on her shoulder for comfort, not a hand to help her from a wagon. His fingers, rough and calloused, traced the line of her jaw. It was a touch so gentle, so desperate, it almost broke her. He pulled her to him, his arms wrapping around her, burying his bruised face in her hair. He held her as if she were the only solid thing on earth. "I was never going to leave you," he whispered, his voice thick with pain and a terrible, ragged love. Clara, I would have burned that whole town to the ground." She clung to him, the blade still in her hand, and for the first time since she had left her father's house, she felt safe. When they reached the cabin, he saw the truth, the empty pegs on the wall, the missing tools, the silent chicken coop, the barren corral. She had sold their life. He sat heavily on the stool, his body aching. She knelt before him, taking a clean rag and the water from the canteen to wash his face. Her touch was tender. "He is gone,"
she said, dabbing at his split lip. Silas Croft. He will not be back. And you, he said, looking at her, his one good eye clear. You are not the woman I met at the stagecoach. No, she said, her eyes meeting his. I am not. That woman is gone. I think you saved her, and I think I saved you. She paused, her hand resting on his knee. Samuel, I love you. He flinched, as if she had struck him. I love you, she said again, the words clear and strong, no longer a whisper. I do not love you because you saved me from that man. I love you because you never tried to own me. You gave me a room and a garden and a gun. You gave me back myself, and that is more than any man has ever given me. Samuel stared at her, his hard, scarred face breaking. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small, velvet box, the one with the ring. I cannot love you. Clara, he whispered, his voice hoarse. I do not have the right. The things I have done. Tell me, she said. And so he did. He told her about the ring, about his wife, Elspeth, about the men who had come. Years ago, ranchers who wanted their water. They had not just taken the water. They had broken her. And when they were done, they had left her to die. I was not a rancher then, he said, his voice dead, staring at the ring. I was a U.S. Marshal. I wore a badge. But the law did nothing. They were wealthy men, like your Croft, so I took off the badge. He looked up at her, his eye a pit of old, cold pain. I hunted them, all three of them. It took me a year. I did not use a gun. I used this. He nodded at the blade in her lap. That is why I came here. To be shunned. To be left alone with what I am. I am a murderer. Clara, I did not do it for justice. I did it for vengeance. Clara listened. She heard his confession. She heard his sin. You say you murdered them, she said, her voice soft. You say you did it for vengeance. But you told me they did what was done to her. And you hunted them. She looked at the blade. That is not murder, Samuel. That is balance. He looked at her, his heart in his eyes. She stood up. She took the blade from his hand. She took the ring box from his other hand. It is over, she said. It is all over. She led him out of the cabin, to the field. The sun was up now, bright and warm. By the dry creek bed, a single, stubborn mesquite tree was covered in pale, yellow blossoms. She knelt at its base. With the blade, she dug a hole in the hard-baked earth. It was difficult, but she was strong. She placed the ring box in the hole first, Elspeth's grave. Then she took the blade, the tool of his vengeance and her deliverance, and she laid it on top. She looked at him. He knelt beside her. Together, they pushed the earth back into the hole. They buried his past, and hers, under a blooming tree. They rode into town 2 days later. Clara was wearing a pair of Samuel's old trousers, belted tight at the waist. She was wearing his pistol, the one he had taught her to use, strapped to her hip. Samuel was bruised, but his head was high. They rode 2 borrowed horses, loaned to them by the widow, Sarah Bishop. The town stopped to watch. Mrs. Pruitt, on the mercantile porch, gasped at the sight of Clara in trousers, at the gun on her hip. They were not the preacher's ruined daughter and the town killer. They were Samuel and Clara Rigg. They did not go to the jail. They went to the land office. Clara walked in first. She slapped the widow's deed down on the magistrate's desk. We are filing this claim, she said. The magistrate, a small, bespectacled man who had heard rumors of what happened with Sheriff Brody, looked at the deed. He looked at Clara. He looked at Samuel, who stood in the doorway, a silent, battered promise. Yes, Mrs. Rigg, he said, his voice suddenly brisk. The deed for the Bishop land. By the North Creek, 100 acres. It seems to be in order.
The widow had lied. It was not a worthless silver claim. It was a strip of good land, far from town, with its own water. It was a new life, given in payment for an old debt. They signed the papers. They walked out, landowners. They rode out of town, not toward Red Hollow, but north toward the creek. They left the empty cabin, the whispers, and the prejudice behind them. They had nothing but 2 borrowed horses and a piece of paper. Samuel looked at his wife, at her profile against the setting sun, her hand resting on the butt of the pistol.
"Clara,"
he said, his voice rough. She turned to him, a small, quiet smile on her face. "It is a good day for building," he said. And together they rode toward home. The North Creek was not Red Hollow. The water ran clear, shaded by cottonwoods, and the soil, while stubborn, was dark and held promise. Their new life began not with a house, but with a lean-to, built against the side of a granite boulder. They had 2 borrowed horses, a single axe loaned by the widow, and the clothes on their backs. A year passed. It was a year carved from the earth by hand. The land was hard. The first winter was a trial of ice and wind, the lean-to barely holding against the snow. Food was scarce. They hunted rabbits, and Samuel, with a new rifle bought on credit from a traveling merchant, brought down a deer that saw them through February. Clara's garden, planted late, yielded only a few handfuls of withered beans, but they ate them together, by a small fire, and they were the best meal she had ever tasted. They built their new home, log by log. It was not a box. Samuel, it turned out, knew how to build. He notched the logs with a precision that was almost tender. He built a real porch, wide and facing the creek. He built a window, a real one, with glass he had traded 3 cured deer pelts for in a town 20 miles north. The silence between them, the cold, terrible weight that had filled the cabin at Red Hollow, was gone. It had been replaced by sound. There was the sound of Clara, reading aloud in the evenings from a book one of the ranchers had loaned them. Her voice, once a dry croak, was now clear and melodic. There was the sound of Samuel, whistling. It was a low, tuneless sound, a thing he did when he was mending a harness or carving a new stool, a sound he seemed unaware he was making. It was the sound of a man at peace. There was laughter. Once, when Scrap, their ugly, loyal dog, had tried to carry off one of Samuel's boots and got it stuck on his head, Clara's laugh had been so sudden and full that Samuel, who was chopping wood, stopped and just watched her. He did not smile, not fully, but the lines around his eyes softened, and he shook his head, a small huff of air escaping his own chest. And there was touch. It had not come all at once. It had grown, like her garden, slowly and then all at once. It was in the way he would lay his hand on the small of her back as they passed in the narrow doorway. It was in the way she would lean her head against his shoulder as they sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the creek. It was in the way their hands found each other in the night, a simple, grounding clasp of fingers in the darkness. They slept in the same bed. It was a bed Samuel had built, wide and strong, and there was no fear in it. There was only the comfort of a shared life, the warmth of a body next to hers, a bulwark against the cold and the past. Clara, who had once been defined by her father's rigid piety, found a new calling. The mesquite tree where they had buried the blade and the ring had become a landmark. It was a place of peace, not death. In the spring, when its pale yellow blossoms filled the air with a sweet scent, she began her school. It started with the widow's son, Ben. Sarah Bishop had asked if Clara could teach him his letters. He was a shy, quiet boy of 9. Clara sat with him on a blanket beneath the tree. Soon, other children came. The ranchers in the North Creek Valley were isolated, far from the town and its prejudices. They were families who judged a person by their work, not their rumors. They saw the house Samuel and Clara had built. They saw the garden, now thriving. They saw 2 people who had survived.
3 days a week. Clara held her school. She taught 5 children, then 7, then 10. She taught them to read from her own worn Bible, the one she had bought back from the mercantile, and from almanacs and newspapers. She taught them sums and geography. She was not a preacher's daughter. She was teacher. She had a purpose again, one she had chosen. Samuel found his own way. He was still a silent man, but his silence was different. It was no longer a wall. It was a quiet space. He paid back the widow. He did not use money. He showed up at her farm one morning, his axe and saw in hand. Her barn, damaged in a windstorm, was leaning dangerously. For a month, he worked. He and the widow's son, Ben, wordlessly tore down the ruined section. He taught the boy how to notch a log, how to set a post, how to read the grain of the wood. He did not praise the boy, but when Ben finally managed to square a beam on his own, Samuel had laid a heavy hand on his shoulder for just a moment. The boy had beamed as if he had been knighted. Samuel rebuilt the barn, stronger than it had been before. When it was finished, Sarah Bishop had come out with a fresh-baked pie and tears in her eyes. "How can I ever thank you, Samuel?" she asked. He had just nodded at her, his face as impassive as ever. "The boy is good with his hands," he said, and then he turned and walked the 2 miles home, his tools on his shoulder, leaving the pie untouched. He had not done it for thanks. He had done it to settle a score, to make the world right in his own small, quiet way. Their new life was built. It was steady. It was real. And so, the past had to test it one last time. A rider came from the telegraph office in town. He was wary, remembering the last time he had delivered news to this family, but Clara met him on the porch with a glass of cool water. The telegram was for her. It was from her father. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The words were stark. "Mary is dying. Consumption. She asks for you. Come at once." Clara sank onto the porch step. Mary, her sweet, kind sister, the only one who had wept when she left. The world tilted, the warm sun going cold. Samuel came out of the house, drying his hands on a rag. He saw her face, the color of ash. He saw the yellow paper in her hand. He knelt in front of her, not as he had done in the dust, but as a partner. "What is it, Clara?" "My sister," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "Mary, she is dying. Back home, my father, he sent for me." Samuel was very still. He looked at her, then at the house they had built, at the valley, at the life they had made from nothing. He was a man who had lost everything. The thought of her leaving, even for a day, was a physical pain. "You must go," he said, his voice quiet, but without hesitation. She looked at him, her eyes wide with unshed tears. "Go back there? To him? To that house?" "She is your sister," he said. "She asked for you. You will not forgive yourself if you do not." "But you," she said, her hand reaching for his. I do not want to leave you." "I am not a child," he said, his voice rough. He took her hand, his grip hard and sure. "I am not the man you found in Red Hollow. This house will stand. The garden will grow. I will be here when you return." He was not sending her away to protect her. He was sending her because he knew she was strong enough to go, and strong enough to come back. He was giving her the choice he had never been given. She left the next morning. He drove her to town in a new wagon, one he had built himself, pulled by a new mule. He gave her a small pouch of coins. 2 weeks, she said, her hands clutching his arms at the stagecoach stop. "I will be back in 2 weeks." He did not kiss her. The town was still watching. He just nodded, his face carved from stone. "Be safe," he said. She climbed into the stagecoach, a different woman from the one who had arrived a year and a half before. She was not a ruined daughter. She was a wife, a teacher, a landowner. She was Clara Rigg, and she was going to say goodbye.
Samuel watched the coach disappear in a plume of dust. He stood there for a long time, until the dust had settled. Then he turned the wagon around and rode the long way home, the silence in the seat beside him cold and heavy once more. He was alone. He tended the garden. He fed the hens. He patched a hole in the roof. He sat on the porch and watched the sun go down. The silence of the house an aching, hollow thing. He had not realized how much he had come to depend on the sound of her breath in the night. On the 10th night of her absence, he was awakened by a sound. It was not Scrap. The dog was on the porch, and he let out a low, vicious growl that was cut off by a sudden yelp of pain. Samuel was out of the bed, his pistol in his hand, before his eyes were fully open. He heard a crash from the barn, men's voices low and rough. Bandits, horse thieves, likely, who saw a lone cabin and an easy mark. "Just the one man here," a voice hissed from outside. "Saw his woman leave last week. Take the horses. I will check the house." Samuel's blood went cold. They were not just after the horses. He moved to the window. In the pale moonlight, he saw 3 of them. One was by the corral, cutting the rope. 2 others were moving toward the house, rifles in their hands. He did not wait. He aimed, just as he had taught Clara. He squeezed the trigger. The shot exploded in the night. The man closest to the house cried out, clutching his shoulder, and fell back. "He is armed," the leader yelled. "Get him!" Gunfire erupted. Bullets tore through the new glass window, shattering it. Wood splintered from the doorframe. Samuel fired again, taking cover behind the thick log wall. He knew he was outmatched. 3-1. He only had 6 shots. He heard them at the back of the cabin, trying to break down the door. He fired through the wood, and a man screamed in pain. "I am hit." "Leave him! Burn him out!" the leader roared. Samuel heard them piling brush against the side of the house. He heard the scrape of a match. He had no choice. He could not let them burn the house she had built. He reloaded his pistol with his last 6 bullets. He took a deep breath, and he kicked open the front door. He came out low and fast. He shot the man with the torch, hitting him square in the chest. The man fell, the torch sputtering in the dirt. The leader, who had been by the corral, spun around, his rifle firing. Samuel felt the first bullet hit him like a hammer blow, spinning him around. It took him in the side, under the ribs. A hot, searing pain. He staggered, but stayed on his feet. The second bullet tore through his left leg, and he went down. He lay in the dust, his pistol skittering out of his reach. The leader, a tall, bearded man, walked toward him, his rifle aimed at Samuel's head. "Fool!" the man spat. "All this for a mule and 2 nags." He centered the rifle on Samuel's forehead. A blur of gray and yellow shot from the darkness under the porch. Scrap, the dog, who Samuel had thought was dead, launched himself at the bandit's throat. The man roared, surprised, swatting at the dog. The rifle fired, the shot going wild. Scrap's teeth sank into the man's arm. The bandit screamed and threw the dog off, then leveled his rifle again. This time, Samuel was ready. He had pulled the long, heavy blade from his boot, the blade he kept, not for vengeance, but for survival. As the man aimed, Samuel threw it. It was not a long throw, but it was true. The blade spun once and buried itself deep in the bandit's chest. The man looked down, his eyes wide with shock. He dropped his rifle. He took 2 steps, and then fell, face first, into the dust. The third man, the one he had shot in the shoulder, was gone, having fled into the night. Silence. Samuel lay in the dirt, the world spinning. The pain in his side and leg was a roaring fire. He looked at the house, their house. It was safe. He tried to pull himself up. He could not. Scrap crawled to him, whining, his own side bleeding where the man had kicked him. The dog licked Samuel's face. Good dog," Samuel whispered.
He looked at the house, at the dark, empty doorway. "Clara!" He laid his head in the dust, the moon blurring above him, and the darkness took him. Clara returned 2 days later. Her sister was at peace, her father's forgiveness given, though she no longer needed it. She felt a lightness in her step as she got off the stage. She had hired a wagon to take her the last stretch home. She saw the scene from a quarter-mile away, the shattered window, the splintered door, the dark, unmoving shape in the yard. "Faster!" she screamed at the driver. She was out of the wagon before it stopped. She fell to her knees beside Samuel's body. He was pale as death, his skin cold. The dust around him was black with dried blood, but he was breathing. It was a shallow, ragged breath, but it was there. "Samuel!" she cried, shaking him. His one good eye, the one that was not swollen from the fight, flickered open. He saw her. "Clara," he breathed. "You came back." "I am here," she sobbed. "I am here." With the driver's help, she got him inside. The house was a wreck, but he was alive. For a week, she did not sleep. She tended to him. She dug the bullet from his leg with a sterilized knife, her face set in a grim mask, her hands steady. The one in his side was worse. It had glanced off a rib, and it was deep. She cleaned the wounds, stitching them closed with her sewing needle and thread. She fed him broth, spoonful by spoonful. She sat by his bed, sleeping in the chair, her hand on his chest, feeling the rise and fall of his breath. He was delirious with fever. He called out in the night. He called for Elspeth. He called for his men. And he called for her. "Clara, stay. Do not leave me." "I am right here," she would whisper, bathing his face with a cool cloth. "I am not leaving." On the 8th day, the fever broke. He woke, his eyes clear. He saw her, asleep, her head resting on the edge of his bed, her hand clutching his. She had not left him. She woke when he moved. She looked at him, her eyes dark with exhaustion. "You gave me more than safety," she whispered, her voice raw, touching his scarred cheek. "You gave me breath again." He did not have the words. He just lifted his hand and tangled his fingers in her hair, holding her. Word of the attack spread. The wounded bandit had been caught in town, and he had talked. On the 10th day, a wagon arrived. It was Sarah Bishop. She brought a freshly baked bread, a pot of stew, and her son, Ben. Ben carried a small bundle of firewood. An hour later, another wagon came. It was Mr. Harris from the Mercantile. His face was red. He did not speak, but he left a large sack of flour, a tin of coffee, and a new pane of glass on the porch. All day they came, one by one. The ranchers, she taught, the women from the town, even Mrs. Pruitt, who looked ashamed, left a thick wool quilt. They brought food, tools to replace the ones she had sold, books for her school. They came, they left their gifts, and they did not stay. It was their apology. It was their acceptance. The town that had shunned them was now claiming them. They had endured. They had given, and they had earned their place. The summer was warm, and Samuel healed. His leg would always be stiff, but he could walk, he could work. One evening, they sat on the porch, watching the sun turn the creek to a line of fire. The house was whole again. The window was new. Scrap was asleep at their feet, his own wounds long since healed. Clara was leaning her head on his shoulder. She lifted his hand, the one with the scarred knuckles, and kissed it. "You saved me without touching me," she said, her voice quiet in the dusk. "And you loved me without asking." Samuel turned his head. He looked at her, at the strength in her face, at the peace in her eyes. He lifted her hand, the one that had held a blade to a sheriff's throat, and he pressed it to his lips. And then, for the first time, he smiled. It was not a softening. It was not a grimace. It was a full, real smile, one that lit his gray eyes and erased the scars.
if only for a moment. You are all that's left of me, he said. He stood, pulling her to her feet. He put his arm around her waist, and she leaned into his side. They stood and watched the last sliver of sun disappear behind the canyon. The blade was still buried beneath the blooming tree. The past was quiet. They walked inside, into the house they had built, and shut the door. Thank you for listening to our story. We would love for you to comment with where you are listening from so we can all connect. Subscribe to the Wild West Campfire channel and share your thoughts in English.